What if I were to tell you that you couldn't lose? What if you knew that you could overcome any situation? What if I could give you something that would give you the victory in something that's very important to you, and that victory would be guaranteed? At what price would you pay for that? I think it's really worthwhile for us to talk about the idea of victory and overcoming whatever problems we face, especially now in the midst of this coronavirus. I've seen so much emotional depression and people feeling down and just completely out of control. I think it's important as Christians to know that you can be an overcomer. In fact, you should be victorious. In the Harry Potter series of books, Harry comes across a very special potion called Felix Felicis, otherwise known as liquid luck. That makes the drinker of the potion lucky for a period of time during which everything they attempt will be successful. You may be surprised to hear this, but this idea is actually a very Christian idea. But it has nothing to do at all with potions or magic. And everyone who is a Christ follower is actually in possession of it already. How do I know? Well, I have read the book of 1 John chapter 5. Let me read the first 5 verses for you. I'm reading out of the New King James Version. Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. And everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? About a dozen years ago, when I went to seminary, I had the privilege of a Greek professor who made us translate the entire book of 1 John. That was a thrilling time in my personal life. And when I came across these verses, I found that there were 5 common themes that ultimately lead us to this idea of victory and overcoming. May I share these 5 themes with you today that we see in the original language of 1 John 5. The beginning and the end, first of all, is faith believing. We see it at the beginning of verse 1. Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ, that's the same word that we see at the end of verse 4. Whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is a victory that has overcome the world. And then our faith, that word faith and believe, same idea. In verse 5, who is it who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? It is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and Omega. Faith, so very important. Faith itself is used 299 times in the New Testament. The word believe 249 times in the New Testament. It is certainly one of Jesus' most favorite themes. He praised people who had faith. He complained about people who had so little faith. He told us to pray in faith. He told us to ask in faith. He said, actually, that in faith we would do more than he, more than Jesus. Faith healed people. Faith saved people. Those who were faithful in very little, he told us, would be faithful in much. And even the faith of the smallest seed would move mountains and plant bushes in the seas. This faith, this belief is really core, down to the marrow of our very being kind of faith. As I said, it's the Alpha and the Omega for us. It's the beginning and end. This is the belief very specifically that we see here, first of all, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the promised anointed one. And then we see, secondly, that this is the belief, or this is the faith, that Jesus is the Son of God. And you know, this faith, this belief is not something that we come up with on our own. It comes only from God himself. In fact, it's given to us as a gift. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is a gift of God." And here in the very first verse, 1 John chapter 5, verse 1, it tells us, "Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God." And that leads us to the second theme of Greek words that we see in this that ultimately lead us to this concept of having a victorious kind of life. We want to talk a little bit about the connection between the one who begot and the one who is begotten. We see this in 4 different places in these verses. Do you see it in the very first verse? Whoever believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God. That's the same word as begot. And everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. And then we see it in verse 4. For whatever is born of God. These are all the same simple words. We're talking here about the creator and the created. We, as children of God, are begotten by God. We could not even have the faith to believe in Jesus if we were not begotten by God. And I don't want to skip over this too quickly. You know, when it comes to physical life, it's pretty clear that there is a vast world of difference between living and dead. Something or someone who is dead cannot, of their own volition, choose to come alive. And we know that. Dead is dead. Life is precious, and it comes only from the life giver. It's literally a miracle. I personally have witnessed this miracle 4 times in my life with each of my 4 children. But you know, something goes a little wonky in our brains when it comes to this idea of spiritual life. Somehow we think we could just simply choose to be alive spiritually. If only we would choose Jesus and become a Christian. Haven't you heard that? But again, spiritual life, like physical life, spiritual life is a miracle. Spiritual dead is dead. Spiritual life also only comes from the life giver. And so if we are indeed alive spiritually, it means that we are, as it says here, one who is begotten. And that can only come from the one who begots. So what is the connection between you and me if we are spiritually alive as the ones who are begotten and the one who begot? This is really the third theme of words that we see interplayed in these verses over and over again, and that is this idea of agape love. We see these words, agape love, although in your English version it only says the word love, 5 different times in the first 3 verses. Let me go over them with you again. Whoever believes that Jesus is Christ is born of God, and everyone who, here's the word, agape love, loves him who begot, also agape loves him who is begotten of him. And then in the next verse, by this we know that we agape love the children of God, when we agape love God keep his commandments. And then again in verse 3, for this is the agape love of God, that we keep his commandments. So over and over again, agape love. That means unconditional love. That means a choice to love. That means a unselfish love. It really is the best description of God's love. The Greeks had 4 different words that they used for love. Agape, as we see it here. They also had eros, which we use for erotic or romantic love. They had storge love, which was an empathetic love. And they had philia love, where we get Philadelphia, brotherly or friend love. So our problem really is that we want to say, yes, of course, I love God. We say that, and we mean it. But the problem comes when we say, yes, I love God, but I don't care so much for so-and-so. But we see here that we're really not given that choice, especially if the so-and-so we don't love so much is also a child of God. In verse 2, it says, everyone who loves him who begot also loves him who is begotten of him. Suppose I were to say to you, I love you, but I really despise your kids. You? I love. But your children, I despise. You're wonderful, adorable, lovable, my very best friends, but your kids, they're repulsive, terrible, loathsome. I hate them. Somehow, I don't think you would care very much for that or for me. But, we do the same thing all the time to God when we say or even feel that we hate someone, especially when that someone is also a Christian. So you may ask, well, how do I really know if I am loving him who is also begotten? How do I know if I am loving or not? And this brings us to the 4th theme of Greek words that we see simply translated in these verses. And this is really the heart check of our love. And that is this idea of keeping his commandments. We see it repeated again in 3 different places. Let me again go over this with you in verse 2. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep his commandments. And then in verse 3, we see it twice. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. He repeats himself here. Why? Why so quickly 3 different times? Because he really wants you to understand what this means. This is the proof of whether or not we are loving his children and thus really loving God, that we keep his commandments. And we often misunderstand what this really means, because this is not a matter of keeping a bunch of rules, a bunch of do's and don'ts. A lot of times we get caught up in the legalism of Christianity, but this is really so much more than that. It's a matter of how we are relating to God and to his people. This is a heart issue. This is really the stuff of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' very first sermon. Do you remember the themes that kept coming up over and over again in those 3 chapters from Matthew? Am I loving, or am I calling people fool and being angry all the time? Am I loving, or am I lusting? Am I remaining faithful to my spouse? Am I known as a truth teller so that I really don't even need to take an oath because my word is my bond? Am I someone who can turn the other cheek? Am I someone who would give up my best coat to someone that I have wronged? Am I someone who would go the extra mile when it's required of me? Am I someone who would give generously to those who are needy? Am I someone who gives and prays and fasts in such a secret way that no one really knows I'm even doing it but God himself? You know, these are the kind of commandments, the kind of keeping his commandments that John is talking about here. I know that I really love God the Creator and that I really love other people, his creation, when I love the way that Jesus taught me to love. Whenever we start talking about loving like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, it's easy for us, and easy for me too, to just get overwhelmed. We say, you know, that is impossible. I really can't do that. Just can't be done. We want to do it that way. We think, boy, wouldn't it be nice? But hey, this is reality. We have to look out for number one. You know, John actually anticipates that argument. He expects you to think that and to feel it. And he says something truly surprising and remarkable in verse 3. He says, and his commandments are not burdensome. Do you see that there? Verse 3. In the New English translation, it says, his commandments do not weigh us down. Now, you might be saying, how can this be? And John, again, anticipated this question. So John tells us something in this fifth most greatest theme that we see. That the God begotten, which is you and me, if we are Christ followers, we overcome the world. That we are victorious, that we can do this. And we see it in 4 different places that we see this word. In verses 4 and 5. Let me read those for you again, just going back up to it. For whatever is born of God, so that would be you and I, if we're Christian, overcomes, that's the word, overcomes the world. And this is the victory, here's the word the second time, same word, that has overcome the world, third time. Verse 5, who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? All 4 times, overcome and victory is the same word. When we are God begotten, when we are born of God, we are fundamentally changed from the person that we were before. The DNA of who we are changes. We are no longer the same person after our begotten experience that we were before. This is why Jesus told Nicodemus in John chapter 3 that we must be born again, that we must be born from above. It is literally a spiritual birth that creates a whole new person. But when God the Father gets a hold of your heart, your very life begins to change. You think differently about other people. You find yourself doing things for other people that you just wouldn't have done before. And sometimes your friends or your family may not even understand why it is that you are now being so gracious, so loving, so willing to let bygones be bygones. But the reason is simply this, that you are no longer a citizen of this world. Instead, as Peter tells us in 1 Peter 2:11, you are as foreigners and as strangers in this world. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus in Ephesians 2:19, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. That's where our citizenship is at, not here. That we are not to be, in Romans 12:2, not conformed to this present world, but we are to be transformed. Still, it would be understandable for you to be frustrated that you haven't yet changed completely. You need to understand that there is a metamorphosis to this change, and it does take time. It doesn't happen instantaneously. You are not yet the person you are becoming. But on the other hand, hopefully, you're not the person that you used to be either. God is changing you. But in order for that change to happen, you have to agree to cooperate with God. Perhaps one reason why we are frustrated is that oftentimes we focus more on doing Christianity than simply being a Christian. We think we must do more loving things when God simply wants us to make ourselves more loving. And this brings us to a fundamental truth of Christian faith. This is really the big thought that I want to leave with you today. God transforms who I am first, and then what I do follows. Let me say that to you again. In fact, you might even want to write it down. God transforms who I am first, and then what I do follows. I want you to know that God actually has also provided you and I in this modern world with a $3.6 billion reminder plan. Let me tell you about this $3.6 billion reminder plan. Let's go back to those verses again in verses, let's see, where are they at? This would be in verses 4 and 5. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. That word overcomes. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world? 4 different times in verses 4 and 5. Do you know what that word actually is for overcome and victory? In the original language, the verb there is nikeo. The noun is nike. If you looked at the spelling using English letters, those letters would be Nike. We know the brand as Nike. You see, these words for overcome and victory are named after the Greek goddess Nike. The Roman goddess is actually named Victoria, from victory. Get it? Yeah. So today we have this $37 billion sportswear company named Nike that spends $3.6 billion a year to promote that famous swoosh logo and the motto behind it, just do it. Just do it. How often times have you heard that? Just do it. Now, I think that there is a fundamental problem with this motto for us in the Christian land, because in and by myself, I cannot just do it. Oh, I can do it for a little while. I can try. Sometimes I win. Often I lose if I do it the world's way. 1 John chapter 5, in these 5 verses with these 5 word themes, reminds me that God has a plan for me to really do it. And he will empower me and you, if we are truly Christians, to overcome the world with the power of his love, which he provides us freely through his Holy Spirit. So now, every time you encounter a Nike commercial, every time you see that Swish logo, every time you hear the motto, just do it, I want you to remember that really you by yourself cannot just do it. That's the world's system, and it just won't work for you. You don't belong here. You're not a citizen of this world. You're just passing through. You are a citizen of another place. You see, this Nike This isn't magic. There's no such thing as Felix Felicis. There's no magic potion you take to be successful. But John says that because God has begotten me, and because God has begotten you, I have faith in Christ. And because of that, God gives me faith. He actually provides it. It's his gift. And when he gives me that faith, he also tells me that I and you can Nike the world. I overcome the world by the transformation that God is making inside of my very being. By the transformation, God transforms me first who I am, and then what I do follows. So when you see that swish, when you hear the words, just do it, you translate into your head, God transforms who I am first, and then what I do follows. Go out and be victorious today.